Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in a moment. We're going to allow people to filter in. I'd like to welcome everyone. This is the third in a series of Community Wildfire Webinar Series hosted by Thriving Earth Exchange. We're going to wait another minute for people to get in, and then we'll start. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone today. This is the third in a series of our webinar series hosted by Thriving Earth Exchange. This is the Community Wildfire Webinar Series, and today's webinar is called Emergency and Evacuation Planning. I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you. Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to the third in a series of the Community Wildfire Webinar Series. Today's series is titled Emergency and Evacuation Planning. My name's Jamie Tuatili-Lewis from the Resource Conservation District here in Monterey County. So before we get going, I'd like to start with some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. Attendee cameras and microphones are muted during the presentation. Please type your questions into the questions or chat box that you have on your control panel throughout the presentations. These questions are going to be answered by the panelists at the end of the webinar. And then we're going to have links to the post-webinar survey and webinar Q&A will be available in the Q&A box at the end of the session. So this is the third in the series of webinars, emergency planning and preparing for evacuations. We have two more webinars on Thursday, May 20th and Thursday, May 27th, moving towards a fire resilient landscape and taking steps towards community wildfire preparedness. And then we'll have these on the Fire Safe Council of Monterey County's website. And this has all been through the American Geophysical Union and the Thriving Earth Exchange program. And this is part one of a wildfire education mitigation project. So I'd like to say that post-webinar surveys and Q&A session help with scoping part two of the project. So this is part one. We'll have a part two soon. Stay tuned for project updates through the Carmel Valley Association Bulletin, through the Monterey County Fire Safe Council website, and the thrivingearthexchange.org/projects website as well. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Let me start with the introduction here first. Our first speaker is Chief Reno DiTullio Jr. Chief DiTullio Jr. is the unit chief for CAL FIRE's San Benito-Monterey unit. Chief DiTullio Jr. is a second-generation CAL FIRE firefighter. He's followed in his father's footsteps. His father, Reno DiTullio Sr., worked his way through the CDF ranks to become the unit chief of the San Benito-Monterey unit. Chief DiTullio Jr. began his career with CAL FIRE in 1988 as a firefighter 1 in the Santa Clara unit. He spent 15 years in CAL FIRE Santa Clara unit serving as firefighter 2, fire apparatus engineer, a fire captain working on CAL FIRE's Alma Helitack crew, and as a licensed paramedic in the South Santa Clara County Fire Protection District. Chief DiTullio Jr. transferred to the San Benito-Monterey unit as a fire captain in 2003. Since his transfer, he has served as a fire captain and battalion chief in the San Benito-Monterey Unit Training Bureau, the operational battalion chief for the Aromas Tri-County Fire Protection District, and the CAL FIRE Hollister Battalion's assistant chief, West Division Operations, charged with operations and admin of the Pebble Beach Community Services District. the Cypress Fire Protection District, and Carmel Highlands Fire Protection District, as well as CAL FIRE's Battalion 1, covering the state responsibility area in and around the Highway 68 corridor, Monterey Peninsula, and Carmel Valley. Chief DiTullio Jr. has served on several instructional cadres and various fire service committees throughout the San Benito-Monterey unit in the state, and he's a lifelong resident of Monterey County and was such is affected by last year's wildfires. He and his family call Monterey County home, and he's proud to serve his family, friends, neighbors, and community as the unit chief of the San Benito-Monterey unit. And with that, I'd like to welcome Chief DiTullio Jr. And we're going to transfer over to Chief in just a sec. Okay, you can go ahead, Chief.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, and you're able to see my full screen?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. As Jamie mentioned, my name is Reno DiTullio Jr. I'm the unit chief for CAL FIRE San Benito Monterey unit, and I am here to present. Actually, I would like to thank the Thriving Earth Exchange for allowing me to present today during the webinar for emergency and evacuation planning. I'm going to give you a brief CAL FIRE overview, and then I'm going to ask you a question. And that question is, are you ready for wildfire? And I hope you are. Last year is a good indication what CAL FIRE is preparing to face this year. We'll discuss reasons why you should be, and hopefully provide you some tools to help you to be ready for wildfire. The California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection's mission is to serve and safeguard the people and protect the property and resources of California. This is what drives what we do. CAL FIRE is California's all-risk department with 9,000 plus strong employees, or employees strong. We protect 31 million state responsibility acres with 21 operational units. Your operational unit being the San Benito Monterey unit. We have cooperative fire protection agreements in 36 of California's 58 counties. We work in conjunction with and as a partner with the Office of the State Fire Marshal. The Office of the State Fire Marshal supports the CAL FIRE mission through fire prevention engineering programs, law and code enforcement, and education. CAL FIRE's resource management program is very active, and it supports our mission through management and protection of California's natural resources, forest practice regulations that encourage and implement fuel management projects to reduce threat of uncontrolled fires. No matter the challenge, CAL FIRE will be there.
Chief?
Here's a short video. Yes.
I think it went back into presenter view. Could you try switching it to full screen?
Yes.
Thanks.
Toggle. See all slides. Display settings. Better?
I think it's still in presenter view. Try again.
Okay, where was it at? All right, I might have to back out of this thing here and try it over again. I apologize.
No worries. We can see it. It's just not full screen. That's all.
And that's not full screen there?
Not quite. We can see everything, but it's just not the typical presenter. I mean, it's not the typical presentation view.
All right, I'm not sure what I did here. Did that
You know,
change anything?
it still appears to be the same, but I think it's legible enough for people to see. So we can continue on, I think, like this. It's fine.
All right, I'll continue then. All right, I'm going to show a quick video here for you.
Chief, I'm so sorry. I think that it might have frozen. I apologize, everyone. I'm gonna really quickly change our sharing options. If you could pause it for a second, and then I'm gonna just change to here.
Burning at a rate of 1,000 acres per hour. Tonight it is raging out of control, threatening homes. Crews, there are 100 people
Chief,
never in the American West.
can you pause the video for a second? It looks like it's frozen.
Hey, Chief.
Yeah.
Something's going on with the video presentation. I think either we're going to restart the presenter mode for you, or we're going to try to work on some things on our end for you. We can see you, but the video wasn't really quite working.
Okay. Well, I guess my point is with the video that regardless what emergency there is, CAL FIRE will be there. Do I have to show my screen again?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay, are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Is it full where you need it?
Yes. It appears full to me.
All right. I'll just carry on from here then.
Sounds
All
good.
right. Get through. It's still full screen, yeah?
Yes.
All right. So the CAL FIRE San Benito-Monterey unit is your unit. It encompasses Monterey and San Benito counties. It serves 3 million acres. 2.1 million of those acres are state responsibility acres. We are at peak staffing, 350 strong. We have 12 CAL FIRE stations throughout the unit. Monterey headquarters and ECC is here on Garden Road in Monterey. We have an air attack base that's located out at the Hollister Airport. We have one air tanker, actually one air attack, 2 air tankers, and 1 helicopter. And our helicopter will soon be upgraded to the new CAL FIRE Firehawk, which you see in the picture down on the bottom left. The Gavilan Conservation Camp is in Soledad, which is funded for 6 CDCR hand crews. We also have a cooperative partnership with the California National Guard, who does supply a crew as well. We have 17 engines in the unit, 3 dozers, administrative and support vehicles throughout the unit. We have 6 cooperative fire protection agreements in our unit. And our resource management office, like I mentioned earlier, is extremely busy. Last year, we completed 4 of the governor's priority projects. 3 of them were in Monterey County, 1 of them was in San Benito County, and we are leaders in fuel reduction through the use of mastication, chipping, goats. We use goats to reduce fuel, and through control burns and our vegetation management program. Our law enforcement office is very active as well with law enforcement and investigation of fires. 2020 was a historic year. We started the year with COVID. We had to address COVID on a statewide level, and we participated in many vaccination sites throughout the state and throughout the counties of California. The department ran nearly 500,000 emergency incidents statewide, everything from EMS to structure fires to hazardous materials incidents, you name it, CAL FIRE was there. On the wildland fire front, last year was a historic year. We ran almost 9,700 wildland fires, which burned nearly 4.2 million acres. There were 31 fatalities in those fires last year. And last year, the fires damaged or destroyed nearly 10,500 homes. 6 of the largest, most damaging fires in California history came last year. Locally, we saw a historic fire year as well, with the River Fire, Carmel Fire, and Dolan fires all burning at the same time. The River Fire burned 48,000 acres and damaged or destroyed 43 structures. The Carmel Fire burned nearly 7,000 acres and damaged or destroyed 80 structures. The Dolan Fire burned nearly 125,000 acres, damaged or destroyed 4 structures, one of those being a U.S. Forest Service fire station. These 3 fires prompted evacuation warnings or orders for about 35,000 people in the Carmel Valley and Highway 68 corridor area. Imagine the scope of that for this area, evacuating Carmel Valley and the Highway 68 corridor. That's pretty extensive. The 2021 outlook, what we are preparing for this year is another very active fire season. The wildfire activity throughout the state has increased. There are more fires and acres burned on average and combined than last year to date. We are in drought conditions throughout the state. The rain did not produce as we had hoped. The fuels are parched and dry. On a conference call this morning with a counterpart in Mendocino, they noted that their brush and timber are burning like they would be burning in August. And in January, we had a small fire in the Corral de Tierra area that had complete burning of a brush component, and that was in January of this year. So to prepare for that, the government and CAL FIRE augmented our funding. So we had early staffing of CAL FIRE resources throughout the state. We were staffing engines, crews, and aircraft up to and more than a month in advance of what we normally would do to meet the needs of the upcoming fire year. Early detection systems are being put in place. We have partnered with Alert Wildfire, who currently has roughly 130 wildfire cameras located throughout the state, and we're expecting to bolster those up to nearly 800 by the end of the year. Our fuel reduction programs are extremely active throughout the state. The governor has set a goal to implement treatment for 500,000 acres annually by 2023. He's also set a goal of defensible space inspections of 250,000 defensible space inspections annually. We can't do all this. We can accomplish a lot, but we still need the public to help out. So what I'm asking you all to do is to plan, know, and act. We want you to plan. Log on to our website, readyforwildfire.org, and download the app to get wildfire alerts and tracking information on current fires. We want you to know the risks. We've talked about some of them. We looked at a historic fire year last year, and we are anticipating a very similar historic fire year this year. You need to be prepared for that. And we need you to act. We need you to create your defensible space around your homes. We need you to harden your homes. We need you to be prepared, and we need you to be ready to go in case of an evacuation. Rest assured, CAL FIRE will be there. We want you to be ready for wildfire. Please log on to our website for more information. I hope you found this presentation with just minor technical difficulties, and but mostly I hope you found it informative. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief DiTullio Jr. I really appreciate it, and I apologize about those technical difficulties. They were minor, but yeah, I'm sorry about that. Thank you again for presenting. I know it's you have a busy schedule. So with that, I would like to remind everyone that if you have questions for the presenters or the panelists, please type them into the chat box or the question box you have in the control panel. We'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar. But if you have questions, for example, for Chief DiTullio, please type them in, or for any of the presenters, type them in as we go through. So with that, I would like to introduce the next speaker. Kelsey Scanlon is the Emergency Services Planner at the Monterey County Office of Emergency Services, where she's worked for the past 3 years. She's previously served as Emergency Coordinator for Sonoma County Fire and Emergency Services, and she's worked for the Northern Virginia Emergency Response System, so she's quite experienced in this field. Kelsey received her Bachelor of Science in Political Communication from Emerson College and her Master of Science in Engineering Management, Emergency Crisis and Risk Management from the George Washington University. And with that, I'm excited to have Kelsey Scanlon present. Welcome, Kelsey. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Let me just switch over to my presentation real quick. Let's see. Okay, is it in presenter view or is it in the presentation?
It's in presenter view right now. For a second, it was in present. Try it again.
Let's see. How about now?
Yes, that looks, yep, that's it.
Okay. So I'm here to build off of what Chief DiTullio had just talked about, specifically about evacuations. So there were a lot of questions during the River and Carmel fire that I've seen during other large-scale incidents that I thought I would bring up here. The time for education is really not in the middle of an emergency, though we do provide that information, but I really am hoping that this information could get out to the public before we have any large starts this year, and just kind of explain the in-depth process of evacuations. So I'll talk about the purpose, the types, the terminology, who has the authority, the assumptions that we make from our office and from a first responder perspective, general movement and migration of populations, and what it is that you need to know to protect yourself and your family. So the goal of an evacuation isn't, contrary to popular belief, to force people out of their homes for no reason. And we're trying not to disturb so many lives that is unnecessary. So ultimately, we're trying to do it efficiently and effectively by making sure that the fewest amount of people have to go the shortest distance. So we're not trying to, in a tsunami scenario, evacuate people from Salinas who wouldn't be impacted by a tsunami. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. So we really try to gauge what the immediate population is going to look like that might need to be evacuated and how far they need to move out of the threat or hazard area. This one we get a lot, oh my goodness. And it's really important for people to know the difference between the terminology. In your defense, the standard terminology wasn't really formalized by the state of California until, I want to say, last year. So before, it was really upon the agency who was enforcing the evacuation to come up with their own terminology. And so we found that it varied from county to county. And so per California general guidance, these are the official terms that we use for all evacuations moving forward. In the past, you would have seen evacuation advisory being used interchangeably with evacuation warning. And that just really means that there's a threat to your life or property and you need to prepare to evacuate. But most importantly, if you require time to evacuate, for instance, you have access or functional needs, or you have pets and livestock, or you just like have a large family that, you know, takes their time leaving, that's totally my family. This is the time to really start mobilizing. And then the evacuation order it really means that there's an immediate threat to your life and the people that you love in your property. And this is actually a lawful order, typically issued by a law enforcement agency. And then the shelter in place is pretty standard. You go indoors, shut and lock the doors. We won't typically recommend this for a wildfire, but that might be used for other emergencies. And then you'll notice evacuation orders have been lifted, and this is talking about when you're able to return to your home or your community. And then the last three bullets are really about types of road closures, whether they're soft or hard, whether it's like a barricade or just a sign. And that will also imply the level of staffing at those places. And I'll show you some examples in a little bit. In general, there are two types of evacuations. There's the no notice evacuations, like we are just now finding out about this and the threat to life is imminent. It is happening now and you need to leave. And then there's the protracted type of evacuation that we know that this hazard is coming. You might have 30 minutes, you might have 3 days. It really depends on the situation and you have time to issue the warning and then the order. Or scale it back if the threat dissipates. And so what you'll notice is first the mobilization of first responders, and then you'll notice the implementation of the evacuation order or warning or a shelter in place. And then you'll see the impact to the community. Obviously, with a no notice event, you might see evacuation and impact at the same time. And then the displacement of people from their residences, which we call mass care. And that is people who no longer have a home to go to, whether it's just because they can't access it or it's no longer physically standing. And then eventually re-entry, so allowing the population back to their communities. The authority to do this. So the recommendation to evacuate a population comes from the incident commander. They're the ones who are saying, okay, this is the threat. This is the population that will likely be impacted. We need to move them out of harm's way. So they will make that recommendation, whether it's a strong recommendation or a general recommendation is really dependent on the agency, the incident, and the personality and their confidence in the situation. And then ultimately, who has the authority to essentially force people out of their homes, which is what an evacuation is law enforcement. And that is outlined in the California Penal Code. So in the unincorporated area of Monterey County, you'll notice the sheriff's office typically conducting evacuation orders. The other agencies might be like a local police department or CHP. But these decisions are never made in a silo or independently without coordination and communication and concurrence from the first responder agencies and general community. And then our office generally supports both the incident commander and law enforcement in implementing an evacuation warning or order. So some assumptions. We have to make a lot of assumptions just due to the nature of all hazards planning. And so for some, you'll note that there is some warning time, but in some cases there are no opportunities to provide warning. But also, a lot of people might not actually listen to you. And that's something that every county across the United States deals with. But we assume that people are not going to want to leave their home, which is understandable. They're not going to want to depend on somebody else to protect their structure. They're going to want to do that themselves. And so we try to plan as far enough in advance to accommodate those people. But of course, if you have a deputy knocking at your door telling you it's not safe to be there anymore, it's time to go. A lot of people will, especially in Monterey County, self-evacuate in their own vehicles. We don't have a very pedestrian or bicycle population, unless of course you're on the peninsula. So in the unincorporated area, we assume that 90 to 95% of the population has their own form of transportation. And then 911 will always be overwhelmed. We saw this during the North Bay fires in 2017. We saw this in the Camp Fire, and even we saw it in the River Fire and Carmel Fire. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can just read through them as you will. This is, I want to say, 25% of the overall assumptions that we have listed in our evacuation and transportation plan. So it's quite extensive. So during the River and Carmel fires, you probably noticed that there were different zones and they had different numbers, and a lot of people really identified with that. Some communities pre-establish evacuation zones. You'll see that in Santa Cruz County or Sonoma County. At this point in time, Monterey County does not have pre-planned evacuation zones. We develop them on a case-by-case basis, and so the numbers might change per incident. You'll also notice that within the first couple of hours, the zones might not be so clear. It takes time to develop the public-facing information and to draw the maps. But essentially, this is the type of public information resource that will become available to people within, a couple hours of an incident happening, or within a couple hours of being asked to leave your home. This model is actually really great for facilitating the return of people to their homes, but also providing information about what's happening in which zones, which level it's at, and where the boundaries of the zone are located. There are two types of movement models. So when you're talking about mass migration of humans from one place to another, especially in a disaster, you'll see the hub and spoke, which is people leaving their homes to go to a temporary evacuation point or an assembly area until it's safe to continue on to their next destination, which could be a friend's home or a shelter. And then you'll see the second model where it's point to point. So people going directly from their homes to a shelter or to an evacuation center, and that's their final destination. And so we try to focus specifically on point to point, but more often than not, you'll find that hub and spoke concept occurring in the more rural, wildland, urban interface areas. So how does it work? So essentially there's an identification of a threat or hazard. So typically we'll receive notification based on 911 calls. And then you'll see the initial notification to public safety agencies and the establishment of systems such as mutual aid or the operation of the Emergency Operations Center. And ultimately you're trying to establish that incident command right at the front. Once the threat has been identified and the population that's being threatened has been identified, that's ultimately when the incident commander recommends to law enforcement that they need to evacuate a certain area. Law enforcement will then typically request notification to the public. We call this alert and warning, and that can either be done through 911 dispatch or through our office, depending on capability and resources available. Then you'll see law enforcement start to mobilize, right? So they will get a bunch of deputies out. They'll start doing their door-to-doors. If it's a warning, it's just a knock and talk. You'll hear them reporting back to dispatch if you're listening to the radios. And they really do go door to door, and they confirm whether there was a human in that structure or if it was empty. They also confirm whether or not the person decided to leave or they decided to stay. If the person decides to stay, they will have them either sign a waiver, a release of liability for their life and safety. Sometimes they'll give them a Sharpie to write their social security number on their arm, or a toe tag if they're really serious about it. And then ultimately you'll see them tagging a structure, sometimes with caution tape. And then law enforcement and public works will start to establish those road closures. So once you tell people they can't go back to their home, you really have to secure that entrance, making sure that the crossroads are appropriately identified and there's no loop arounds. And then from there, we get involved with establishing like endpoints, so evacuation centers or emergency shelters, and assisting in the coordination of transportation, especially with public resources or like long-term care facilities. This is actually a one of those Ring video snapshots of a deputy going to somebody's house to make sure that they were evacuated during the river fire. All right, so what do you do? If you have time, like it's a protracted event, you're under an evacuation warning, please stay informed, register for emergency alerts, check your local news, listen to the weather radio, patrol your property to see if there's any embers or flames nearby. If you feel that your life is threatened at any point in time, please evacuate. Do not wait for somebody else to do or to tell you to do so, and do not wait for an emergency alert. In that time, you should also be preparing to leave. So grab the kids, grab the pets, grab your emergency kit, make sure you're wearing appropriate clothing. And then if you can and it's safe, obviously try to carpool, check in with your neighbors who you know might need a ride, Grandma Susan down the street. Call your loved ones, let them know what you're doing, where you're going, let them know when you get to your destination. Make sure you secure your homes, unplug any electrical equipment. This is all, of course, if you have time. I don't want people to be like unplugging their utilities if like the fire's right there, of course. And then making sure that at any given point, especially if you live out in rural areas, make sure that your car always has at least a half tank of gas. All right, how do I leave? If somebody is knocking at your door telling you to leave, it is time to leave. I know everyone in Carmel Valley wants to talk about staying and protecting their structure, but what we saw during the Carmel Valley or the Carmel Fire and even the river fire was if we are sending somebody to your door, we are using taxpayer dollars and we are risking their lives to tell you to leave your home. Please do not stay. The longer you stay and try to negotiate with the first responder, not only do you risk your life, but you risk their life as well. Your decision to stay is risking a first responder's life. We don't take these orders, we take these orders seriously. And so if we are there at your door, it's for a reason. Please follow the instructions. So if they tell you not to take a specific route, there's also a reason. They will likely recommend an evacuation route. Don't take shortcuts, they may be blocked, or you might not have very much familiarity with the road. Watch for road hazards. So if you are evacuating under an order, it's likely that there are hazards on the road that you are not aware of. There might be down power lines. But also please be aware that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? It's kind of like don't commit a crime while you're committing a crime. In this case, don't have an accident in the middle of a disaster. Don't create a secondary emergency in the middle of an emergency. So make sure that you maintain your vehicle, make sure you drive slow, be aware of first responders, especially large apparatus on those narrow roads out there. And then of course, do not call 911 for general information. Only call 911 if you need assistance. If you have general questions about the fire and where it's located, please call 211. But we really encourage the public not to inundate 911 with calls about general information. All right, so say you're trapped. I really don't like this slide, to be honest. I'm hoping that people leave before they find themselves in a situation where they're trapped. But considering the last couple of years, I feel knowledge is power. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're trapped, stay calm. This is the time to call 911. I've included both what to do in a fire and flood. And I know we're here to talk about fires, but I added flood because typically post-fire is post-winter storm, post-fire debris flows. And this definitely applies. So make sure that you, if you're in your vehicle, and you have to pull it over, try to leave it off the side of the road to allow first responders to continue to move through the area. Try to put it in an area that's clear of vegetation. If you're stuck in your car, lie on the floor and cover yourself with a wool or cotton blanket. For flooding, make sure you park it above the floodplain or above a flooded area. If you're unclear as to what that might look like, just find a higher location, look uphill. If you're on foot, go to an area clear of vegetation. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I really hope nobody finds themselves in a position where you're evacuating on foot. You should have left earlier if you're in this situation. But try to lie face down and cover your body. If you're at home, fill the sinks and tubs with cold water. If you have a pool, we've seen people survive by getting in those. We saw that during the 2017 fires. Or try to stay inside your home with the windows, doors closed and unlocked. And then stay away from the outside walls and windows. Where am I going? Okay, so there are a couple of options here. You've left your home, you're in the car, you got the kids and the dog and grandma and your go kit. You are going to an evacuation assembly point possibly, depending on what's been established. And so that's really an attempt to get you out of the immediate threat before you can go to a safer destination, but it's not your end point. There are temporary evacuation points, so we set these up during the winter storms. It's really just a place for you to go until you figure out where you're going to stay the night. We do these for more low-level emergencies that don't necessarily require you to go to a friend's house or be gone for more than like 12 hours. There are evacuation centers. There are shelters, or you can stay with your family or friends. We got a lot of questions about this during the Carmel Fire about temporary refuge areas. These are for trained professionals. We do not recommend that the public use this as the only option. I know a lot of people want to stay and defend their homes, but temporary refuge areas are only acceptable if you are trained to do so. And if you have questions about whether or not you're trained to do so, it's likely that you're not trained to do so. So yeah. Re-entry and repopulation. Everyone wants to know when they can go home. Totally understand it. I wonder that the second I get into the office. I'm almost done, Jamie. I'm so sorry. This decision is made cooperatively. We considered a lot of different things to make that decision, but ultimately it's phased. And we take the safety of the public as our most important priority. The picture on the left is them tree felling and restoring utilities to the town of Paradise. All right, returning home, what you need to do, you need to mentally prepare yourself. You should expect delays and patience. You should expect that entry points are likely going to be controlled, but you also need to be prepared to leave again if officials tell you to do so. What you need to do, don't return home until somebody allows you to do so. We will notify you. Only return home when it's safe to do so. Get plenty of rest. Bring your proof of residence. Please leave the kids and pets home for that first trip back, and make sure you have water and gas. All right, and finally, here's how you find out. You can text MC Wildfire to 888-777 or your zip code to 888-777 or register for Alert Monterey County. We also only send out wireless emergency alerts, that little amber alert sound on your phone, and catastrophic incidents. And then we have our wildfire preparedness page where you can find all of this information. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. That was great. I'm sorry we made you rush there at the end, but there's a lot of information to pack in there. Please, if you have questions for Kelsey, type them into the chat box. And for questions for anybody, please type them in. We still have one more speaker to go, and I'm going to introduce her. Next up, we have Wanda Vollmer. Wanda is the founder and CEO of Peace of Mind Preparedness, which provides education programs on disaster readiness for families and businesses in California. She was previously the Community Engagement Manager at the American Red Cross and is currently serving as captain of the CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team in Carmel, California. Her mission with Peace of Mind Preparedness is to empower families and businesses to be disaster ready and to build a better prepared community. And with that, I'd like to welcome Wanda Vollmer. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief Reno and Kelsey. That was really informative. I wanted to just, before I launch in, I just wanted to share my story with you and why I do what I do. So I grew up in a small rural town in San Luis Obispo, that is, on a ranch. And in 1996, I was awoken by a wildfire. It was the largest fire at the time. And it was approaching our home, and the experience from start to finish was terrifying. And that is what has led me to do what I do today. So years later, I joined the American Red Cross and I preach preparedness. And so for today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you, in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through a basic disaster preparedness 101. Okay. All right. So as Chief Reno talked about, with all the statistics, we had many fires in California, and one in particular, the Carmel Fire, the Dolan Fire, and the River Fire. So if we just remember, just a few months ago, we had all these wildfires surrounding us, and we breathed in smoke for weeks, we sheltered, we evacuated family and friends, and we suffered. And at the end of the year, we had over 4 million acres of fires that burned in California. So what we can learn from this are gone are the days of wildfire season. When I was growing up, wildfire season was just one season, it was in the summer. But as Chief Reno says, we have fires now that are in January and all different times of the year. So what that means is that we need to be prepared. And so what I do is I preach preparedness. So let's just go ahead and dive right in. I like to break disaster preparedness into a few sections: getting connected to local resources, knowing the disasters that can happen in your area, how to respond to the disasters, and what I mean is not by running out of the building unless it is a fire, disaster kits, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about one of the most important elements of disaster preparedness is the communication plan. Now, while this is a lot of information from all of us, and for me in particular right now in a few minutes, I want you to know that not all of this has to be done by 6 p.m. tomorrow night. If you just choose one thing at a time, you can get your disaster preparedness going little by little. So first up, communicating and connecting to resources. The way I see being connected is twofold. As Kelsey mentioned, alert Monterey County. Let's start with your cell phones. While we can't be notified of every disaster, it's a good idea to be notified of the ones that we can. So we're prepared ahead of time if possible. It rules out the element of surprise, if you will. So for example, your cell phones can actually be your friend. Whether you love them or loathe them, they're a very useful tool. So we have Alert Monterey County. I definitely recommend, if you haven't signed up for that, please do so. Chief Reno talked about readyforwildfire.org. These are things that you can do tonight on your phone. Our phones are also great resources for other sources of information. Weather. I love the FEMA app. My friends at the American Red Cross have also developed a great app as well. And one of the best ways to get connected if our cell phones aren't working is the good old-fashioned radio. And so an AM/FM radio is fantastic. But if you want to take it a step further, I recommend getting a NOAA radio. And what is that? Some people don't know. It stands for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So we had this back on the ranch when I was growing up. And what this type of radio does is it broadcasts weather information 24 hours a day. But in the event of an emergency, if you tune into the Monterey channel and Marine channels, you can actually get important information when it comes to shelters and emergencies. And that's a wonderful resource right there. Another way to get connected besides technology is through education. I always recommend that at least one member of your family sign up for a first aid class, a CPR class, or also maybe a CERT class. That's the Community Emergency Response Team that I'm on. And what we do is we help first responders with anything they need. It could be traffic control, it could be basic disaster response, light search and rescue, and things of that nature. And that's a free class, so I definitely recommend that. So, you know, getting prepared means learning what types of disasters can happen in your area. So we have earthquakes here in California, wildfires and fires, winter storms, floods, biological chemical threats, and pandemics. And once you know what to do, what the kind of disasters we have in your area, it's important to learn how do we respond to these disasters. As we know with earthquakes, we understand drop, cover, and hold on. Wildfires, Chief Reno gave us some good tips on that. Home fires, our friends at the fire station have given us wonderful tips on that. Keep an eye on what you fry. Get out, stay out. Biological, chemical threats, and pandemics. I think we're very well versed in sheltering in place at this time. Now, a popular topic when it comes to disaster preparedness is disaster kits or go bags. Now, most disasters happen fast. You're not going to have time to pack or shop, so I definitely recommend that you pack now so that your family will have what you need. So what these bags are designed for is to go. So if you do get a bag, this is my bag right here. It's a fantastic bag. You want it to be something that you can actually carry or maybe roll or carry on your back in the event of an emergency. It's important to have a kit for each person in your household for up to 72 hours. I recommend a kit for your home for each member of your family, a smaller version for your car, and also work. And don't forget those pets. So a lot of people say, what do you put in your kit? So there's you have your radio, food, water, essentials. And if you wear glasses, if you have medication, make sure to personalize your kit with those items that are needed. I do have lists available, so after this, feel free to email me and I'm happy to send you lists on what to pack in your home, car, work, and your pet kits. A lot of questions I get from my clients are, do you buy or do you build one? That really is going to depend on your budget. You can save a lot of money by building your own kit with the lists that are provided, I can provide for you, or you can actually buy them. This kit right here was designed by first responders back east. It's my favorite. It came fully stocked. All I had to do was pack my clothes and my personal items, and I'm ready to go. So another question I get is, where do you store it? Now, I go to a lot of my clients' house, and their disaster kits are huge, and they can barely lift them. So I definitely recommend make sure to keep your kit light and keep it in an area that's going to be near an exit and easily accessible. So, and I'm a bit of a preparedness nerd, so how often should you check your kit? I get that question. I check mine during daylight savings time. And that's a good time, you know, either gain or you lose an hour, that's a reminder, but you can also check your smoke alarms, your carbon monoxide detectors. Also check your kit for expired food, water, a new prescription for your glasses, or anything of that nature. So, okay, cruising along. One of the most important steps of disaster preparedness is the communication plan. Now that we have our bags packed, where do we go? So this is the communication plan, or as I like to call it, family dinner. Identify the people in your life. Who are your people? And once you have those people, you know, at your dinner table, learn each other's phone numbers, write them down, share them with each other. Pick an emergency contact. Choose an out-of-area contact that won't be affected by the local disaster. And when you get all that information, talk about escape routes. This is something that we call situational awareness in the disaster world. Take time tonight, for example, and sit in a room in your house and think about how you would escape if there were a fire coming. If there was a fire to my right or to my left, I know that I can get out of the window. So make sure to do that wherever you go. I'm not trying to make you paranoid, I'm simply trying to make you aware. And it's very important to choose emergency meeting spots as well. So have conversations at this dinner conversation, as I call it, with your family and where you would go if you were to evacuate, and define those emergency spots and find out. A lot of people, my clients, they don't even know where their children are going to be dropped off. So it's really good to have this family dinner or the communication plan. And it's also very important to have important documents stored. In that fire in 1996 that I experienced, I will never forget running from my house to my mom's house and scrambling to get valuables and important documents out of the house. Now you can upload these documents into the cloud, or you can download them onto a thumb drive. So, okay. So I've just covered a lot of information in a very short time, and some of you might be thinking, my goodness, I've got so much to do. But again, I want to reiterate this to you. With personal preparedness, if you set a goal for yourself, let's say give yourself 6 months or give yourself a year, if you pick one thing, like every few weeks, you will get your preparedness plans taken care of. And I really encourage all of you to increase your personal sense of safety, security, and peace of mind. So I never want you to experience what I went through in the fire of 1996. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Wanda. Really appreciate that talk. It was packed with information, yet nice and concise and clean. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our speakers once again, Chief DiTullio Jr., Kelsey, and Wanda. Wonderful job. One thing I'd like to reiterate to the audience is if you have questions, please type them into the chat box. And to our speakers and panelists, we're probably going to run over just a little bit on the time. So if you can, to stay past a little bit past 6:30, that'd be great. If you can't, we understand, and hopefully we can follow up with any questions for you. But we will probably run about 5 or 10 minutes over 6:30 if that's okay. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to our questions point person, Scott Hannum from the Carmel Valley Association, and I'll let Scott queue up the questions.
Okay, the first question is for Chief Reno DiTullio. What is home hardening? And in addition to that, there's questions about funding. What funding is available from the state for home hardening and defensible space?
Okay, so home hardening would be the practice of making sure that your home is resistant to fire. Starting off with building construction and codes to be Class A compliant, fire resistant siding, boxed in eaves, fire resistant roof, no flammable vegetation within at least 5 feet of the building itself. So essentially making your house resistant to fire or fire embers that could catch your house on fire. For houses that are already wood sided and have shake shingles, try to do some sort of treatment for your home and give yourself quite a defensible space to ensure that embers are not able to catch your wood siding or your wood shake shingles on fire. And the second half of the question was about funding that would be available for home hardening. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, so I didn't, so the funding that I was talking about was for early fire season and for fuel reduction. There is funding available through fire safe councils in the area, through the state. The grant applications for some of those funding mechanisms actually close on May 19th. I would reach out to your fire safe council to determine if you meet criteria for your homeowners association or your neighborhood to assist with fuel reduction grant funding that might be available for your area. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
The next question is for Kelsey. Could you clarify whether people should lock their windows or doors or otherwise?
So what I meant was, wait, so for what specifically? Like when you're leaving?
It could be whether maybe there's two scenarios, when you're leaving or when you're staying.
So when you're leaving, you should close your doors, but you can leave them unlocked if you would like a first responder to go in there, or if you want looters to go in there, you choose. You can also lock them. The main point for if you are trapped in your home was to not allow embers or air through the structure. So closing windows, closing doors, but obviously keeping them unlocked so first responders can get to you. Does that clarify?
Yes. Another question for you, Kelsey, is the Office of Emergency Services is working on an evacuation plan for the county. And we hear that's going to be available for public review at the end of the summer. Can you give us any insight into that?
Absolutely. So the plan is still being revised or updated from the 2010 Evacuation and Transportation Plan, which was developed with a UASI grant. This is done in-house, not by a consultant. We have had 3 planners working on it, but we are really looking at developing pre-established zones by jurisdiction. And so that is a very complex process. Other jurisdictions, it has taken them anywhere from 3 years to a decade, when we're trying to do it in a shorter amount of time, obviously. And it really is personal. It really is complex. Do you do it based on parcel line? Do you do it based on road? Is it by jurisdiction? Disasters don't care about jurisdiction boundaries. And so is it by topography? Is it by hazard? Is it by evacuation route? So we really are looking at the full scope of every hazard, not just wildfires, and community movement and mass migration and available resources based on those zones. So we are working with all of the cities and our first responder partners in the unincorporated area to develop those zones based on their beats, which are different for fire and law, and making sure that the zones for each community are appropriate, both in response and culturally speaking. But our intent is still to have it available to the public this year.
Oh, thank you. Chief Reno, the Carmel Fire had the most structures destroyed compared to the River Fire and Dolan Fire, but had the least acreage. Could you explain that to us?
Sure. The location that the Carmel Fire burned through was more population dense than much of the area that the River Fire burned through. The River Fire started at the top of a mountain in Toro Regional Park, where there's very few homes around that location. The fire was pushed by the wind down canyon where it got into the homes. Fire typically burns up and out, and it's can be wind driven or topography driven. Once the fire got in alignment with the wind, in the River Fire case, it pushed the fire down into the homes where there was loss of homes on the first day, and then I believe it was 2 days later, the same sort of event occurred and pushed fire down into homes again. The rest of the area, the footprint of the River Fire, there were largely no structures, no homes, no buildings, the whole mountain range where that fire occurred. The other side of that coin is the Carmel Fire started along a roadway, and it burned with the wind, fuel, and topography up the hill, where there was a ridge line of homes, and that's why there was a larger loss of homes on that fire than there was on the River Fire. There were simply more homes in that area where the fire burned in a shorter, in less acreage burned.
Okay, thank you, Chief. A question for Wanda. What is the most important evacuation planning step when it comes to seniors? I think
Wanda,
you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I get that question a lot, and it really falls into the communication part for seniors. I really like to emphasize for seniors to know your community. If you have family that's not in the area, getting to know your neighbors, getting to know, find out who your core people are in your location and connecting with them, because they can save your life and making them, you know, aware of your situation. So definitely communication and getting to know your neighbors.
All right, I think that covers our questions.
Okay, just so for the people who are remaining in the audience, if you have further questions, please, you can go to the Fire Safe Council of Monterey website, which has the link in the chat box, and you can submit more questions. We will try and for those questions, we'll try to get back to the panelists and see if they can answer them to the best of their ability. Again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. There's a lot of information. I know it's a lot to pack into an hour, but I really appreciate everyone's time in presenting this material, especially the Chief, Wanda, and Kelsey, all very busy. It's going to be a busy fire year, and we all need to get prepared. So again, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.